executive director of the San Joaquin County Historical Museum. And my area of study in Stockton is immigration and segregation and economic development in the Delta Valley and in Stockton. So we'll go ahead and get started. I always like to have an icebreaker because I'm a former teacher. I believe in anticipatory sets, and I think this is I'm extremely nervous. Okay, this is honestly, it's a real honor to be here. And the icebreaker might help me a little bit. So 32 seconds. Turn to your neighbor. Why is it important to study history? 32 seconds. 32, 31, 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're gonna go and get started. All right. Do I have any volunteers from the crowd? All right, hold on. We're going over here. All right. Volunteer. Why is it important? So we know where we came from. All right. So mistakes aren't repeated.
Puts everything in perspective.
Put things into perspective. Any other volunteers? Somebody got volunteered or voluntold. Already said. Anybody else? Say it. Knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? I think it's really important to study history because it allows us, and Connie said this so beautifully, that to be able to understand history gives us the ability to understand what's happened to ourselves and to understand ourselves, right? And there's a refrain: if you know your history, you know yourself. And I think that it's really important to look back, to understand about who we are and where we're going. So my talk is going to be about 70%, 60% about Stockton and San Joaquin County and the Japanese community in Stockton and San Joaquin County. San Joaquin County looks like this. Sacramento is to the north, Fresno and Modesto and Merced are to the south. Here's the Delta. San Francisco would be off to the left. This is Stockton, circa 1896. Just to give you a sense, this district here was what was known as the Nihon Machi, or the Japanese Quarter. And it was the second largest Japanese neighborhood in California after Little Tokyo and in Japan, in Los Angeles. So we're going to start with a Japanese American history in Stockton and San Joaquin County. I want to footnote, I don't have citations on every page. As a historian, it's always really important to cite your sources. But most of this is derived from the historical work of Ikuko Torimoto at St. Norbert College, Eiichiro Azuma at Duke, Nelson Nagai, a retired professor from Delta College. Say, huh? Nelson? Yeah, Nelson's great. A travel writer from the early 20th century who lived in Stockton's Nihon Machi. His name is Okina Kayumin. And then also Ohashi Kanzo, who wrote a Japanese language history of Stockton in 1939. So we'll talk about early arrivals. Municipal court and tax records, which are corroborated by immigration documentation, suggest that the first Japanese immigrants arrived in Stockton between 1886 and 1888. It was predominantly male at first, and at least 3,000 immigrants arrived in Stockton from Japan in this 2-year window. So a lot of people came all at once, mainly from Hiroshima, Kurume, Fukuoka, Nagano, and Wakayama. There we go. And these men worked in the Delta as farm laborers, with many employed in Thornton, Lodi, Stockton, Holt, Tracy, Brentwood, and Walnut Grove, and Hood. And it's likely that more than 3,000 arrived to the region in this time period, because there are anecdotal references in newspapers of many more people But government records are not ideal for tracking transient labor populations, right? Because people are going from farm labor camp to farm labor camp. It's not always easy to track who is there. Between 1888 and 1895, Japanese immigrants to San Joaquin County and the Delta were deeply engaged in farm labor. Laborers are known to have worked in Lodi's watermelon patches and grape vineyards especially, along with the various specialty crops of the Delta. By 1900, Japanese farm workers had largely replaced the Chinese community as the primary source of farm labor in the region and had begun to unionize and purchase land. This is a photo of most likely Japanese farm laborers in Lodi. This gentleman here, I later found out, went on to start the first farm labor union in San Joaquin County in 1902. Agricultural entrepreneurship, beginning in 1895, several Japanese farm laborers began to acquire land in the California Delta. And municipal government deed records suggest that George Shima, Ushijima Kenji, he's known to have purchased his first farms north of Stockton in this period. By 1900, areas such as Brack and Terminus tracts, which are west of Stockton and Lodi, Terminus tract is known for the town of Terminus, which was predominantly Japanese, are 79% Japanese operated or owned. And during this era, several Japanese farm operators were able to purchase land or lease out ranches and become magnates in the region. By 1906, Shima is known as the Potato King. 11 of the 100 largest taxpayers in the county are Japanese immigrants. And that's extremely rare for immigrant communities to California. Due to the increasing success of Japanese farmers in the period, we also begin to see the first large numbers of Japanese women arrive in Stockton, and several marriages are reported on in local newspapers in the last 5 years of the 19th century. Some interesting photos. This is George Shima and his dog. This is a photo of farm laborers on Terminus tract. This is a ship loaded with potatoes that were grown by George Shima Farms. And this is a photo of business people from Japan visiting George Shima's farms. Between 1900 and 1910, the Japanese community of Stockton and the county leveraged its wealth towards the development of civil society, integration with the Anglo community, and creation of business institutions. There was the Nihon Machi, the Stockton Japanese Quarter, which was home to several prominent businesses in town, such as the Nippon Dry Goods Store. There were 4 Japanese language newspapers in Stockton between 1900 and 1942, including the Ofun Depot and the Stockton News. There were several major trading houses and several houses of worship, including the first incarnation of the Stockton Buddhist Church. The local Nihonjin Kai, which was the Japanese association, was probably the most prominent in the country because George Shima was largely considered the most prominent Japanese American. Several Japanese businessmen during this period became major players in local business. So one interesting thing, how many of you have been to Stockton? How many of you seen the Stockton Hotel, the Hotel Stockton in downtown? The Hotel Stockton is this beautiful Mission Revival hotel that George Shima paid for outright, in cash, actually. And he paid for it because he needed a place that was nice enough for Japanese business people from Japan to stay at. Other business people, such as S.A. Naka, members of the Tanaka family, members of other families, would also develop close ties with local financiers and corporate entities. This is the ambassador from Japan. This is the president of Stanford University, right? And this is, I think, 1911 or 12 when this photo is taken. So they achieved real prominence. What's really incredible is that they did this in spite of racist violence. And while some white community leaders in the area welcomed the Japanese immigration, many others saw a threat to white control of capital or to white control of civil society. And this was categorically racist. This is exacerbated by Japanese farm labor organizing. As I mentioned, the Japanese community was the first community in the Central Valley to organize farm labor unions. And there were several major strikes of Japanese farm laborers taking place in the 1910s. And the goal was to be paid a living wage, right? And the result of this was that Ulysses S. Webb, this guy, a great villain in California history, he ran through a series of laws called the Alien Land Laws in 1913 and 1921. There's another one in 1924, making it progressively difficult for Asian American immigrants to own land in California. And I've gone through state archival records in Sacramento, and several major agricultural barons in Stockton and Lodi advocated for these laws. In fact, and some of those people are still around, their great-grandkids are still around today. And many met with Webb personally to advocate for their passage. Also during the 1910s, there was an increasing number of incidents of white violence towards Japanese and Chinese men that's reported on in the Stockton Record and other newspapers. Also, what's taking place during this time is the beginning of residential segregation in California. And prior to 1912, there was no formal legal segregation in Stockton or anywhere in California for that matter, because the segregation was more based on real estate transactions and informal coordination. In 1912, local real estate developers began to write in racially restrictive housing covenants to housing deeds to prevent people of color from purchasing houses in certain neighborhoods. They look like this: racial restrictions, no property on the housing deed, it will say this. Instead, addition shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, or leased in whole or in part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race. The translation is really clear. The United States was built on racist foundations in terms of economic systems, and this is an evolution of that. By 1920, Japanese people and all people of color were generally barred from living north of Main Street or west of California Street in Stockton. There are a few exceptions, notably George Shima, who remained among those who were wealthy enough to build their own house because they could just buy empty land and build a house. Or alternatively, they bought houses before the 1910s when there was no legal segregation. In spite of these challenges, the Japanese community was extremely innovative in essentially getting around segregation and the alien land laws. In spite of these challenges, the community was able to grow. By 1924, newspaper records suggest that the county had the second largest Japanese community in the country outside of Hawaii by count. And for most of the 1920s, many of Stockton's most profitable businesses were Japanese owned. In the 30s, the community was among the most philanthropic in the region, paying for buildings at local schools, the construction of San Joaquin County's first county museum. It was actually funded by the Pomeroy and Yamada families. They were able to form companies that were able to essentially get around the alien land laws. This is a map that was done by, there's a local website that's dedicated to Nihon Machis in California. Stockton's Japantown, Chinatown, and Little Manila, Japanese American businesses in 1940, right before the war, and of course the incarceration. So this gives you a sense of how large the Japanese community in Stockton was. There were probably 3,000 or 4,000 people of Japanese descent that lived in this area, probably another 4,000 or 5,000 people that lived in places like Lodi, Tracy, Terminus, and the Delta. This is the Nippon Drug Company, which was actually, as far as I can tell, probably the most profitable mercantile business in Stockton and a major pillar of the community. And that takes us to incarceration. And I'm not going to go in depth into the history of the incarceration because I think there are other people who can do that more eloquently and more thoroughly. But I will talk about a little bit about the Stockton Assembly Center. So this is the Stockton Assembly Center Fairgrounds, just southeast of Stockton. Oh, sorry. And this is actually in the newspaper. This is a drawing by Mei Satsuki Oroga of the Stockton Assembly Center Hospital. Here's a photo of someone who was incarcerated, who was outstanding outside the Stockton Assembly Center. This is a photo by Dorothea Lang, and it was mentioned earlier that maybe some photos were staged to appear to make the incarceration look less horrific than it was. And my sense is that this probably was one of those photos. A brief timeline of what took place is that the Wartime Civil Control Administration began bringing people to the camp on May 10th, 1942. The peak population was reached a few days later of approximately 4,270. Departures began in September. The camp closed on October 17th. Almost all of those incarcerated went to Rower here in Arkansas. Some went to Gila. There were other Stocktonian Japanese people who did not go to the Assembly Center, and they went to Tule Lake, Manzanar, or other camps right away. A lot of that had to do with geography. It seems like people from Linden typically did not go to Linden's the town east of Stockton, did not end up at the Stockton Assembly Center. The camp had very well-developed educational and medical facilities, a large library, a 10-acre farm, and its own camp newspaper, and received approximately 200 to 300 daily visitors. Here is, I couldn't get a good photo. We actually have the original plans of the camp at the museum. I wasn't able to get a very good photo because of glare, and it's been encased. But this kind of gives you a sense. This is a racetrack. These are horse barns. The conditions were inhumane. How many of you have been to Stockton in the summer, or the Central Valley of California in the summer? So the conditions in these barns was inhumane, and you know, it was a horrific experience, I think, for the people that were incarcerated. And from Stockton, they went to Rome for the most part. In the past 3 years, my institution and the Stockton JACL chapters have worked to preserve the last remaining building from the Assembly Center that remains at the Assembly Center. And this is the hospital building facing south. This is the building itself. This is a Google Earth photo or screenshot facing south from Martin Luther King Boulevard. This is a relative understanding of what the camp Assembly Center footprint would have been. This racetrack didn't exist. The racetrack actually looked like this. There's some question that some of these horse barns actually were barracks from the Assembly Center. It's hard to say for sure. And this is the building in question that was the hospital. So a little bit of history about the project. In 1984, Richard Yoshikawa was able to get the Stockton Assembly named to the State Register of Historic Places. Fast forward about 40 years, the San Joaquin County Fairgrounds, which is where this is at, this area, is named as surplus land by the state government to be demolished and turned into housing. And the plans for demolition very clearly included the Stockton Assembly Center Hospital as being slated for demolition. In August, we had a meeting, the JCL at the County Historical Museum, and we decided that we wanted to preserve this building because it's the last remaining built edifice of the Assembly Center. And so starting in August 2021, we started an advocacy campaign. We were able to get 1,000 letters mailed to the governor's office. In November 2021, the governor's office called myself and called the president of the Stockton JCL and said, we are not going to tear this building down. And that's a win in preservation terms, right? So from there, the Housing Authority of San Joaquin County, which was awarded the bid to develop the fairgrounds into housing, pledges its support. In November of 2022, the California Department of Affairs and Agriculture, Food and Agriculture, which owns the fairgrounds, also indicates it's willing to help. In February 2023, the state senator's office, March 2023, the state assembly member, they pledged their support. In April 2023, the State Parks Department, after some meetings, agrees that the project could fit their criteria to turn the building into a state park and turn the area into a state park, with the concurrence that planning it so that it was viable was the main issue. State park staff visited to survey the property and began drafting a feasibility study in May of last year. And in July of 2023, the community actually held a meeting with the JCL that they wanted to form a project committee to organize and fundraise. In fall of 2023, the State Parks Department began conducting its feasibility study. And they essentially said that it was possible as long as there was community buy-in, and that there was people in the Japanese American community in particular in Stockton who really wanted to see this happen. At this time, all of the state entities involved are agreed on the concept of a land transfer of the parcel, where the CDFA would transfer the land to state parks. The State Parks Department would finance the renovation of the building. And the feasibility study is kind of ongoing. In July of last year, it was agreed that the JCL would form a committee, either as a separate organization or as a subgroup, to identify a feasibility plan and advocate for the project to actually say, we can do this, we can turn this into a community center, and find a way to economically make it happen, because to preserve a building and maintain a building is very difficult. These are some architectural diagrams that were put forth by a local architect who donated their service to what this could look like, where the Assembly Center Hospital building could be essentially a community center where there might be community services, exhibits, potentially a library site. There could be some sort of memorial to what happened and the incarceration. And then there could be park space around it that could have interpretation concerning the history of the Stockton Assembly Center. And these are some renderings that were done as part of that project. So what I will say is that the incarceration experience, one of the many tragic outcomes of that is that there was an erasure of memory. And not just of the memory that took place of things that happened before the incarceration, but also on a geographical scale, where a lot of the community that was incarcerated, they didn't come back to San Joaquin County or Stockton. There's a lot of people that eventually they were born in Stockton, or they were raised in Stockton, or they had lived in Stockton, and then they moved to Los Angeles or to other places. And the result is that the historical memory of the Japanese American community in Stockton and in San Joaquin County is not always talked about, even though from the history of the county, the Japanese American community is central to the history of San Joaquin County and understanding San Joaquin County as a place today. And so I think it's really important that the built landscape of the Nihon Machi and of Japanese Stockton is preserved, because if we can't tell the stories of our past to the people that come after us, it'll be really difficult for those people to understand where they've come from. And so I'm hoping that there are people here that are interested in seeing this building preserved, or potentially interested in joining a committee to help preserve the building and work with the Japanese American Citizens League in Stockton to figure out a feasible plan forward. With that, I'll take any questions. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, we got one over there.
You didn't say this explicitly, but were you saying that a Japanese American businessman funded the building of the fairgrounds, which then became the relocation center?
The Assembly Center Hospital building, which is the last building that's left from the Assembly Center, that's there. There are other buildings that were auctioned off and moved away. But the Assembly Center Hospital building was paid for by the Komure and Yamada families of French camp internists. And it was built as an agricultural museum of San Joaquin County. And of course, the Japanese community in San Joaquin County was central to the story of economic development and agriculture in the community. And so they wanted to see that history preserved. The great irony and tragedy is that it opened in 1941, September, and then 7 months later, the people that had built the building were incarcerated there. And one of the daughters of the Komure family was actually one of the nurses that worked in the hospital building. And she's still alive. I think she's 104 years old. And it's, I think, still a subject of bitterness to the family today, as it should be. Any other questions? Yes.
In the JCL and in San Joaquin County, are they doing anything? They haven't formed a subcommittee or a committee, but are they talking about it?
That's a political question. Yeah, so what I can say is that I'm under the impression that the officers of the JCL are hoping to form a separate organization. I think that any effort to get them energized and make it happen is worthwhile. Because it's been about a year and the committee hasn't been formed. So that's what I'll say. Yeah, so any energized people who are interested in seeing this building turned into the first state park in Stockton, or in the area really, and volunteers are welcome. So it's not something that I think that I should be leading for a host of reasons. It's not necessarily my history to share or to add. It's definitely certainly something that I want to advocate for. And I'm willing to help in a lot of ways, but not necessarily in terms of leading that effort. Yes, Mr. Taguchi.
Mr. Taguchi is my father, by the way. I'm Jim. Not a question, but I wanted to share something. So my family wasn't incarcerated. They were in the Stockton Assembly Center. My uncle wrote a poem when he was in the Assembly Center. I just wanted to share a little bit of it because it can be an inspiration to the work that you're doing. He titled it Night and a Mood. And I'll just read a couple of stanzas here. He said, "Oh, an inspiration for a poem. On a warm and summer night, barefoot the center's track I roam. In childish glee and joy delight." He finishes it up by saying, "To walk barefooted was of naught, for I had failed to feel a poem, though nightly scenes had only brought a lonesome mood and thoughts of home." And so he wrote this in the Stockton Assembly Center, obviously on the dirt track that he had snuck out at night and just kind of wandered. And he dated it September 1942.
Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful.
And I can give you the poem as well.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. One more question? Yeah, we got time.
Yes, my family's from Stockton, Linden, and I've met many people who families are from the Stockton area, but we're scattered all over the country. I'm from New Hampshire. I mean, is it something that we can do because we're no longer living in Stockton? And they may feel that we're interfering the local.
Well, I think that it's your history. And it's not interference to want to see your story and history preserved and shared for future generations. And I think that I would hope that any effort that comes out of this to organize and preserve this building and see it turned into something beautiful for the community would be something that, you know, we live in the 21st century and we have Zoom. And we just had a wonderful, not 2-year experience of working on Zoom. So I think that most of those committee meetings will probably be hybrid. I would hope so. And I would very much welcome the community that was scattered to be a part of that effort. You know, because I think it's your history, right? And just as much as anybody who lives in Stockton.
I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer this question
We'll
as a
try.
historian, but I'm sort of opening it up to the audience. Are there Stockton JCLers here? No? Oh, okay.
One.
So do you know whether you've involved in like the national JCL? No. Okay, or two, You know, as a lot of people know, well, railroad got money, but there's the, National Parks Consortium, and they do a lot of grants every year. And does anybody know whether somebody has applied through that?
I can't.
Because that's an idea. Oh,
The answer is no.
that's an idea.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of money available, and it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
that hard.
I've been encouraging it.
You just need the right grant writers.
Right grant writers and yeah, some energy. So, yeah. So, ACO.
So there are 3 JCL chapters in San Joaquin. So it's French Camp, Lodi, and Stockton. And I think the issue is that they're not going to be able to raise funds under the JCL flag. They need to form a separate entity, nonprofit entity that would be able to receive money for the project. And so far, no one's stepped up and moved it forward. So there needs to be help. And I'm wondering if we could collect names of people that want to get involved, and how do we get their names to you?
ACO, you're great at taking names. You took my name.
So I'm still in Stockton JCL, but I'm in Chicago, so it's kind of hard to do the work, but I definitely want to support it. And I know there are others that want to support it as well. And we want to figure out a way to get it moving, because it's stagnated right now.
You can find ACO and I at lunch. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Early in your photos, you mentioned that you pointed to a man and you said, later I learned that he started farm workers, but you gave his no name. What is his name?
His initials were S.O. Watanabe.
Thank you.
Yeah, and and I haven't been able to find his real first name, but his surname is available. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, nope, we're time for lunch. All right.
Thank you so much, Philip. That was fantastic.